Pretty much every team on the Formula One grid this season has run some sort of special livery on the car, either to commemorate the location of the race or just getting a new sponsor. Looking at you, Ferrari. But one team has got a special livery on their car this weekend at the Canadian Grand Prix, and that's the Haas F1 team. This isn't just to celebrate a new sponsor on the car, this is to celebrate something quite meaningful. The 200th Grand Prix for the American-branded British and Italian-based team. And that goes all the way back to 2016 when the team first entered the Formula One World Championship, and it was pretty momentous when they did enter the series. For starters, the previous attempts at entering a US branded Formula One team into the series hadn't gone particularly well. However, the Haas F1 team, with their giant wind tunnel, which they weren't allowed to use, and their different approach to car development really shook up the sport. In fact, it was a fundamental change to the way you design and build a Formula One car. Rather than doing it all in-house, Haas outsourced as much as possible to the Works Ferrari team. They bought in as much of the car as possible, in fact as much as the regulations allowed. The power unit, the gearbox, the suspension, most of the electronic system, the brakes, that all came from the Works Ferrari team. And the chassis and composite work itself, that was all done by Dallara, who the team had partnered with. Now, if you haven't heard of Dallara, then perhaps you should have done. It's won every Indy 500 for many years. It makes all of the cars in that series and in Formula 2, in Formula 3, in quite a few cars in other major championships, and they kind of are the most successful racing car constructor of all time, though their track record in Formula One hasn't been so successful. In fact, a Dallara-built car has never won a Grand Prix, but there's still quite a lot of time. Haas are constantly improving and sometimes upsetting the apple cart. Haas's unusual approach to the development and building of a Formula One car has actually changed the way a lot of other teams do it. Looking at Racing Bull and their relationship with Red Bull, while it's not quite as extreme as it was, it is very much on the Haas model, and other teams up and down the pit lane are doing similar things. But to look back on 200 races of the Haas F1 team, Mike Seymour is down in the pit lane with Federico Sala from the team's design office.
200 races for the team this weekend, of course. I don't know from a technical perspective if there's anything that stood out over the years for you.
Yeah. For me, mainly two things. First, to be competitive from the very first race is something that's not easy achievable. And the second thing was how we reacted after 2023 season. That season was quite bad for us, but we were able to get together, all the people in Banbury, in Maranello and in the US, understand where the mistakes were, and we worked all together to fix them and to improve the car that we are using from the second half of last season and also this year.
Well, the 2025 Formula One season has been a bit of a mixed bag for the Haas F1 team. The team was forced to introduce a major upgrade to the car without fully testing it in the wind tunnel after an incident like this, well, a number of incidents like this at the Australian Grand Prix. The team realised there was something fundamentally wrong with their car and the way the floor was working. They had to build a new floor, but they didn't have time to test it before they fit it to the car. So that was a bit of a challenge for the Haas team. And in fact, the Haas team has introduced a number of upgrades since then. Fortunately, most of those have been properly developed. And to find out a little bit more about that upgrade procedure, particularly considering the major upgrade at Imola just a few weeks ago, Greg Stewart caught up with the team in the pit lane at Imola to find out all those little details about what had changed. And trust me, this is fascinating.
So we've got an upgrade package. We're changing the floor and the rear corners primarily, and we're hoping that it will help alleviate some of the problems we've had since the start of the season. So a step on from what we tried to do with the Race 3 upgrade. So it's a little bit more comprehensive, but very similar philosophy.
Let's walk through the season. So you started in Australia, discovered this issue with the car, with the oscillations.
Yeah.
Sort of rushed that upgrade to Suzuka, which seemed to work fairly effectively.
Yeah.
Has this upgrade been a bit more considered, had a bit more time to gestate?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what we would have liked to have done. We're still in a research phase to understand the issue. So I think we're one of the last teams to run into this sort of problem. So bouncing's always been a factor in this regulation set. But we've never seen the bouncing appear in the high-speed corners. But speaking to a lot of my colleagues in other F1 teams, I think most people have been through this in one way or another, but it's quite a complicated behaviour.
Ferrari famously last year suffered a few issues with floor with bouncing. You happen to share a wind tunnel with them. Are you confident in the tools you're using, or have you done an investigation into whether that is a factor?
So we were very confident up until we had the problem. So we built our own, let's say, processes and procedures and thought we had a good handle on the mechanism. So it was a surprise to us what we found this year. So we've had to review everything, have a good look. We still think that what we were doing gave the right sort of ideas, but we've had to develop new processes, new CFD analyses, new understandings. So that's unfortunately takes a lot of time. So we're still on that process.
Well, let's take a look at some of the details on the car, because Haas have always been a little bit innovative with some of their aerodynamic details. In fact, they've been incredibly intricate ever since this rule set was introduced. Now, let's not forget, Haas have had some pretty poor seasons over the years, and that's allowed them to get quite a big wind tunnel and CFD allocation. And you can really see that paying off when you look at the front wing here of the Haas this season. Now, this is not a new component on the car. This is something Haas has been working on for some time. In fact, back in 2022, Haas were the first team to realise that you could exploit this inner face section of the front wing end plate and where it meets the wing element. Since then, a huge amount of teams have taken inspiration. And you can see the section I'm talking about down here, where these little turning vanes, these little sticky inny bits, sticky uppy bits, sticky everywhere bits, quite frankly, on the inner edge of the wing, and everybody has seen the advantage to this. I remember when they first came up with this area of exploitation, Ross Brawn pointed it out to me actually, and there was just a little very simple little nubbin sticking in from the interface of the front wing end plate. Red Bull very quickly had their own version fitted to the car within even a day of Haas running it for the first time. Well, other teams have seen how complex the Haas solution have got, and well, let's just say they've been taking inspiration. Here we see Ferrari's upgrade from last time out in Barcelona. Looks familiar to me, doesn't it to you? Well, Ferrari and Haas use the same wind tunnel in Maranello, though they're not allowed to copy each other's homework directly. Well, I think looking at that, the Haas team has clearly inspired their more famous and more illustrious supplier of mechanical parts. But this being a wetted surface, a part of the aerodynamic package that's waving in the wind, well, that has to be developed completely independent by each team. You can't just copy each other. Well, you can copy an idea, but you can't take measurements or anything like that. And Ferrari's solution is actually a slightly different version to what Haas have done. But because Haas have developed this area to exploit, other teams have gone the same way. Take this look at Racing Bulls, another Italian-based team, and they've gone maybe a bit more inspired by Mercedes from 2022 with a cutout at the base of the front wing end plate and this just lovely little extended section picking up on those rear wing elements. So I think that's a really nice solution. But one of the things about Formula One is a lot of teams will come up with really silly names for different parts of the car. Monkey seats, for example, or T-trays, which must mystify people who don't speak English as a first language and don't know what a T-tray is. It's a tray you serve tea on, and that's kind of what the part looks like. But McLaren, well, they've outdone themselves this weekend by introducing an area of that exploitation we were talking about on the front wing end plates. Apparently, these are called mermaid tails. You worked that one out. I don't know, I've never seen a mermaid, a siren, or any sort of mythical water aquatic creature in my life, but I don't know, that doesn't look like what I think a mermaid's tail looks like, because if I understand mermaids correctly, the back of a mermaid is just a fish. That doesn't look like a back of a fish. Some people have said dolphins. I don't know. It's a really interesting exploit and the most advanced area of development we've seen. And I think from McLaren, that's really interesting because McLaren are clearly having a car advantage at this point of the season. But on top of that, they're working for the World Championship. But there's also 2026 coming up and you want to develop your resources into that car so you don't lose out. But clearly, McLaren working very, very hard on this year's car. And I want to understand how a lot of that car development is happening. But Haas has been getting some pretty powerful help in terms of car development and a few other areas of the business. And you can see that as soon as you look at the rear of the car. It's pretty not that one. This one. The Toyota Motor Corporation has been working with the Haas F1 team all season, and exactly what one of the world's biggest car manufacturers is doing with Formula One's smallest team is something that many people have been speculating at. And to find out the exact details, our man Greg is still down in that pit lane.
No, it's been great. They're a great bunch of people. We're still working out what we can and can't do with each other in terms of respecting intellectual property with our other partners. But they're really enthusiastic, want to be involved, want to collaborate on anything technically that we can share. And that's meant some quite interesting things across, let's say, the WEC program, considering trying to do similar sorts of use similar sorts of procedures and tools and methodologies so that we can be more relevant with each other. So, like, for instance, a good example might be, can we use the same CAD system? Because you can benefit from that. So there's that. Obviously, the simulator is a big one with them, so we're leveraging very heavily on their experience and ability to produce simulators. So we're still in the initial phases of getting that to work, but that's looking really promising.
Well, with that sort of help, it's going to be pretty interesting to see where that partnership takes the Haas F1 team. And let's not forget the small matter of the 2025 F1 season, and indeed the 2026 F1 season. Haas is a team that has previously completely sacrificed its technical development for an entire year to get an advantage in the following year. That was the 2021 to 2022 seasons, and it did work out in terms of race results. However, the Haas team also has to work out what they're going to do in terms of developing this car and putting effort into next year's car. And how they manage it, well, that is a matter for Federico Sala in the design office. So let's find out what he thinks about all of that.
Well, the strategy of the development of the 25 car is not yet defined. We will decide what to do after the summer shutdown. However, inside the design office, we are keeping alive different possible scenarios. As you can imagine, being the smallest team on the grid, it's not easy to balance between 25 and 26. However, we were able to start the design of 26 car with a small group of design engineers. And right now we are in the process of switching more and more designers onto the 26. So the upgrades of 25 will be basically carried out by a small core group of designers.
Well, it's 200 not out for the Haas F1 team, and having heard all of that, I'm pretty interested to find out what the next 200 are going to bring. But for now, well, happy birthday to Haas, or happy 200 races, I guess it is, and see you soon on another episode of Tech Talk.